She stood trembling at the altar, 19 years old, a white dress clinging to the body of a girl who had never been kissed, sold by her own uncle to a man 30 years older. But when the billionaire leaned in, he kissed her forehead instead of her lips. And that simple gesture shattered everything she thought she knew about power, control, and love. From that moment on, her story would no longer be about being owned, but about being seen, chosen, and cherished. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. If this story touches your heart, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Your presence is what keeps stories like this alive. The cold wind of Brookfield whispered through the cracked windows of a small aging house on Oak Ridge Lane. Inside, Emily Carter moved in quiet routine, clearing dishes, folding clothes, brushing crumbs from the chipped kitchen table. She was only 19, but her movements carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived decades too long under someone else's roof. After losing her parents in a tragic car accident at 16, Emily had gone to live with her mother's brother, Uncle Henry, and his wife Vivian. They never asked her if she wanted to come. She never asked to stay. In exchange for a roof over her head and a bed that creaked every time she turned, Emily worked. She waited tables 6 days a week at Lindy's Diner, the kind of place where coffee came in cracked mugs, and the jukebox never worked. She handed over every dollar she earned to her aunt the moment she stepped through the door each night. Sometimes Vivian didn't even look up from her shows, just held out her hand without a word. But Emily never complained, not when she skipped prom to work the night shift, not when she wore the same shoes for 3 winters in a row, not even when her dreams of college became faded sketches tucked beneath her mattress. She held her silence like armor, because silence, at least, couldn't be taken from her. But on a bitter Friday evening in March, the silence was shattered. Henry stormed into the kitchen, his face pale, lips trembling with sweat and regret. "We're done, Em," he muttered, pacing. "I gambled again. I thought I could win it back, but..." Vivian stood behind him like a shadow, arms folded, face sharp. "He owes over 100 grand, Emily," she said flatly. "They said they'd take the house, everything." Emily clutched the back of a chair. "What do you mean, they?" Vivian's eyes didn't flinch. Jack Morgan. That name dropped like thunder. Everyone in Brookfield knew who Jack Morgan was, the billionaire from Chicago who built his fortune in real estate and tech. A man whispered about more than seen, known for 2 things, being impossibly rich and terrifyingly private. Emily's voice cracked. "Why would a man like him care about $100,000? Henry looked up with something like shame or fear. "Because I borrowed it from him, Emily, months ago, through one of his private lenders. I thought I could double it. Then I couldn't even pay the interest. And now he wants it back?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Vivian's expression hardened. "No, now he wants you." Silence fell so heavily it made the room shrink. "What?" "He made an offer," Henry choked out. "He'll erase the debt, all of it, if you agree to marry him in 1 week." Emily stepped back, the chair behind her scraping loudly against the floor. Her throat tightened. "You sold me?" Vivian didn't blink. "You'll be taken care of. He's rich. You think waiting tables for nickels will get you anywhere?" "I'm 19, she whispered. "He knows," Henry said, "and he doesn't care." Emily turned to the window. Outside, the wind was blowing flakes of snow across the porch. Her breath fogged the glass. She was 19. She hadn't kissed anyone in 2 years. She hadn't worn a dress since her parents' funeral. And now they wanted her to marry a man 30 years older, a stranger. She stayed awake all night, not crying, just unraveling. And in the morning, when the sky was still dark and her fingers trembled as she buttoned up her diner uniform for the last time, a black car pulled up outside. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out, handed her an envelope with a contract inside. Emily opened it slowly. Inside, a marriage license, already signed by Jack Morgan, a non-disclosure agreement, a list of conditions she had to agree to, and a note, in careful handwriting. "You are not property. This is your choice. Say yes, and I will provide. Say no, and you'll never hear from me again." JM. It wasn't what she expected. No threats, no demands. Still, her heart sank. The choice wasn't really hers. Not with Henry's debt. Not with the roof over her head belonging to the man who ruined her parents' savings and blamed the world for it. She walked to Lindy's one last time, quietly told her boss she was quitting. He didn't ask why. By noon, she was at a fitting room downtown Chicago, standing on a small platform as seamstresses buzzed around her, measuring and murmuring. The woman in charge, Linda, gently adjusted a pin in the back of the white dress. "You know," she said with a soft smile, "Mr. Morgan picked this one himself. He said he didn't want you to feel caged, said he wanted you to feel beautiful, but comfortable." Emily looked at herself in the mirror, long white lace sleeves, a modest neckline, soft fabric that moved like water. It wasn't what she expected. Linda continued, adjusting the hem. "He chose lilacs for the bouquet. Said they were your mother's favorite." Emily turned sharply. "How did he know that?" Linda shrugged. "He asked a lot of questions about you, more than most grooms ever do." And something trembled inside her. Not affection, not relief, just confusion. Why would a billionaire care about flowers, about sleeves and fabric, about what her mother liked? The ceremony was set for 3 days later in a small private chapel at the edge of the city. No guests, no cameras, just the bride, the groom, and the impossible silence between them. When Jack Morgan finally stood before her, dressed in a simple black suit, no ring of gold, no smile of conquest, only tired eyes and a calm voice, Emily didn't flinch. He held out his hand. She placed hers in his. He didn't squeeze, didn't pull. And when the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Jack simply leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Emily's breath caught. No lips, no claiming, just a gesture of kindness, unexpected, quiet, almost tender. She left the chapel with his last words echoing in her mind. "I made a promise to protect you, not to possess you." Emily Carter had walked into that day believing she'd lost control of her life. But as the car pulled away from the chapel, snow falling softly onto the windows, something new stirred in her chest. Not freedom, not yet, but maybe a flicker of choice. Jack Morgan's penthouse overlooked the city of Chicago like a silent sentinel. From up here, the streets looked like rivers of light, constantly moving, oblivious to the quiet ache inside the man who owned it all. At 49, Jack had everything most people would envy. His name etched on skyscrapers, his influence reaching across oceans. Yet inside his chest there was a hollowness that no acquisition could fill, not anymore. His success hadn't been handed to him. He had clawed his way out of a childhood marked by abandonment, rising from the ashes of foster homes and silent dinners to become one of the wealthiest men in America. But along the way, something had hardened in him, something that once believed in soft things like family or love. His last relationship had ended in betrayal, not just of the heart, but of trust. After that, Jack closed the gates of his life like a fortress. No one entered unless absolutely necessary. Business, deals, negotiations, those he mastered, but intimacy, vulnerability, he buried them under marble floors and glass towers. So why agree to marry a 19-year-old stranger? Jack had asked himself that a dozen times since making the offer. He wasn't sure he had a clear answer. It wasn't lust. Emily's beauty was undeniable, but his decision came from somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter. Maybe it was the way her story echoed pieces of his own. Loss, struggle, invisibility. Or maybe it was the way she never complained, never begged, never asked for more. Jack had first learned of Emily through the financial report of Henry Carter's debt. When he saw her name attached to the collateral, something made him pause. Instead of dismissing it as another broken man selling something he didn't own, Jack became curious. Who was this girl? What he discovered made him stop sleeping properly for weeks. Emily Carter, top student until she dropped out to survive. No criminal record, no attention-seeking social media, no signs of rebellion, just work. Shift after shift at that diner in Brookfield, a young woman invisible to the world, surviving in silence. Jack sent people to observe, not to threaten, just to understand. The reports came back simple. She smiled to customers, took care of old ladies who spilled soup, and stayed late to clean when no one asked her to. She had a quiet kind of dignity. That's what stayed with him most. He didn't want a puppet. He didn't want a trophy. He wanted to offer someone what he never had, a place where they were safe. And maybe, in that process, he'd find a version of himself that still believed in softness. In his office, surrounded by glass walls and city noise, Jack had rewritten the proposal letter over a dozen times. He hated the idea of being the villain in her story. He didn't want her to feel owned, so he added a line, just one sentence that made his hand tremble. "You are not property, this is your choice." It was all he could offer, and when her acceptance arrived, wordless but signed, he felt something twist inside him. Not victory, gratitude and fear. He didn't know how to hold something as delicate as trust anymore. He only knew how to guard it. When he met her for the first time at the chapel, she was as he imagined, pale, quiet, unsure. But her eyes were something else. Not hollow, not broken. They burned, even through fear. He wanted to reach for her then, not to touch, but to shield. And when he kissed her forehead instead of her lips, it wasn't strategy. It was instinct. Back in his penthouse after the wedding, Jack didn't sleep. He stood at the edge of his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city as snow began to fall, dusting the world in quiet. Emily was somewhere in the guest room he'd prepared. He hadn't followed. He hadn't even knocked. He just let her go. It had taken every ounce of restraint in him to watch her walk away that night, not because he wanted her body, but because he didn't know if she'd ever trust his silence. He'd hired Linda, the stylist, not for appearances, but because Linda knew how to make women feel safe in fabric. He asked for lilacs because they reminded him of his mother, not the one who abandoned him, but the foster mother who once planted them outside a cracked window in a rundown home in Kansas. She had called them flowers of grace. He wanted Emily to feel grace again. Over the next few days, Jack kept his distance, but he noticed everything. The way she moved through his home, cautious but never defeated. The way she cleaned up after herself without being asked. The way she read quietly by the fire, as if trying to disappear into pages. Sometimes he wanted to say something about the way she bit her lower lip when thinking, or how she tilted her head slightly to the left when confused. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he ordered her favorite tea, chamomile and mint. He left books by her door, ones about strong women in history. He adjusted the thermostat so the floor was always warm in the morning when she walked barefoot. None of it was grand, but Jack knew what it was like to feel invisible. He was determined not to let her feel that way, not in his home, not in his presence. He didn't know where it would lead. He only knew this. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man standing alone in a glass tower. He felt like someone building something fragile, something honest. And maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to hope again. The sound of fabric rustling, steam rising from irons, and the quiet hum of voices filled the bridal suite in downtown Chicago. Emily stood barefoot on a low platform, surrounded by soft light filtering through cream-colored curtains. The dress clung delicately to her body. Not tight, not imposing, but embracing her form with a strange kind of reverence. It was the second time in her life that someone had dressed her for something that mattered. The first had been her mother, years ago, helping her into a white dress for a school recital. Her mother had whispered, "You're not here to impress. You're here to be seen." Now as Linda, the head stylist, adjusted the satin sleeves with expert hands, Emily wondered what her mother would say if she could see her now. "How does it feel?" Linda asked softly, not meeting Emily's eyes in the mirror, but instead smoothing the lace down her back. Emily hesitated. "Like it fits." Linda glanced up. That's what he wanted. Comfort first, elegance second. Emily's brows drew together. "Jack said that?" "He did." Linda smiled without pity. He was specific. No corsets. Nothing too tight. "She should feel like she can breathe," he said. Emily looked down at her hands resting in her lap. The thought of Jack choosing softness over spectacle unsettled her. She had imagined a man who would want control, who would want a girl who bowed her head and did not ask questions. But this dress, this space, it felt like neither a trap nor a pedestal. It felt like a preparation, not for possession, but for dignity. The rest of the day was a blur of gentle hands and hushed conversations. Her nails were filed with care, not glamour. Her hair was pinned with lilac blossoms, real ones, fresh and fragrant, not artificial imitations. Someone whispered they had been delivered that morning, specially ordered from a greenhouse in upstate Illinois. Emily hadn't told anyone that lilacs reminded her of her mother, and yet Jack somehow knew. Each time someone mentioned him, they spoke with an odd softness. Not fear, not admiration, something in between, as if he were a man made of contradictions, cold steel on the outside, but carrying warm ashes of something once tender. By evening, she sat in a quiet lounge near the dressing room, staring out at the city skyline. The chapel was only hours away. The papers had been signed. The rooms were booked. The silence in her chest was thick. She was going to marry a man she had never kissed, never held, never chosen. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Linda again, carrying a small envelope and a gentle expression. "He asked me to give you this before the ceremony," she said, placing it in Emily's hand and stepping back with discretion. Inside was a handwritten note. "No vows will be forced. No words will be spoken that aren't yours. If you wish to walk away before you reach the altar, no one will stop you. I promise to protect your choice, even if it isn't me, J.M." Emily's fingers trembled as she folded the paper. What kind of man gave a girl an escape the night before she was supposed to become his wife? What kind of man expected her to run and still showed up anyway? She wanted to hate him for putting her in this position, for tying his offer to her uncle's mess, for knowing too much and yet doing so little. But what she felt wasn't hate, it was confusion and a creeping curiosity. She rose from the lounge and returned to the dressing room. Linda helped her step into the final layer, a sheer veil that brushed the small of her back. As the stylists packed up and silence returned, Emily turned toward the mirror and faced the woman staring back at her. She didn't look like a prisoner. She didn't look like a sacrifice. She looked like someone stepping into something unknown, carrying both fear and fire. The car that picked her up wasn't a limousine, but a black town car. Quiet, elegant. The driver greeted her with a soft nod and opened the door without a word. Inside, the air smelled of lilac and something woodsy. Cedar, maybe. A small glass of water sat in a holder, chilled but untouched. She stared out the window the entire ride, watching the snow begin to fall again. It didn't stick. It was too light, too early in the season. But it painted the world with a soft urgency. Her thoughts drifted again to Jack Morgan, the man who hadn't met her yet, but had chosen a dress that let her breathe, flowers that whispered of her childhood, and words that gave her the option to leave. Was this all manipulation, or mercy? At the chapel, she was escorted through a side entrance. No flashing cameras, no crowd, just the smell of candles and fresh pine, the polished wood pews glistening in amber light. The ceremony room was small, intimate. There were only 2 chairs on each side, one occupied by a legal witness, the other by a woman who might have been Jack's assistant. Then he appeared, tall, composed, dressed in classic black and white, no boutonniere, no smile, just calm eyes and steady hands. Their eyes met for the first time in full light. He didn't look away, and neither did she. There was something human in his stillness, not cold, just restrained, as if every word he didn't say sat quietly behind his gaze. As the officiant spoke, Emily stood still, not frozen, just waiting. She half expected her knees to give, for her voice to falter when the vows were spoken. But they didn't. When it came time for him to speak, Jack simply said, "I promise to protect you. I promise to respect your silences and your words. And I promise never to touch you unless you choose to be touched." The room was silent. Not even the candles flickered. And when the time came to seal it all with a kiss, he didn't lean toward her lips. He pressed his lips gently against her forehead, warm, still, respectful. Emily blinked slowly, stunned by the simple gesture. It was the first time in months that she hadn't felt taken. It was the first time in years she'd felt seen. As they exited the chapel, the city lights reflecting off the snow and the car waiting to carry them into something unknown, Emily turned to glance at him beside her. Jack didn't speak. He only opened the door, waited for her to step in, and sat beside her without assumption. No touch, no demand, only presence. And for the first time, Emily felt a crack in her certainty. Because this wasn't how she expected to feel at the edge of something irreversible. And what would happen if she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the enemy? The soft hum of the city faded behind them as the car slid through the night, carrying them toward the unknown. Emily sat beside Jack in silence, her hands clasped in her lap, veil slightly askew, heart still caught in the echo of a gesture she hadn't expected. His kiss on her forehead. Not possessive, not ceremonial, just real. He didn't look at her often during the ride, but when he did, his gaze was steady, not probing, just present. It was the kind of attention that asked nothing in return, and yet somehow it made her breath catch in her throat. When they reached the building, she assumed it would be a mansion, a cold, hollow display of power. But instead, the elevator took them to the top floor of a high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and warm wooden floors. It wasn't gold and crystal. It was quiet, tasteful, human. "This is home," Jack said, his voice deep but gentle. "It's where you'll be safe." Emily stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The room smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. A fire crackled in the living area, casting shadows that danced along the walls. A piano rested near the far end, untouched yet somehow familiar, like it had stories it hadn't told in years. She didn't speak. She didn't know how. Jack moved slowly, never stepping too close. "There's no ceremony here," he said. "No expectations." He handed her a small remote. "This controls everything. Lights, blinds, music, temperature. Your comfort is yours." Then he nodded toward a hallway. "There are 2 bedrooms. Yours is on the left, if you ever want company, and you know where I am." Emily blinked. He was giving her space, boundaries. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or strangely unsettled, not because he crossed a line, but because he hadn't. She looked down at her dress, suddenly aware of how much it weighed, not just the fabric, but what it symbolized. A beginning she didn't choose, a bond she didn't fully understand. "Would you help me with this?" she asked quietly, turning her back to him and gesturing toward the row of tiny buttons that ran down the center of her back. Jack didn't respond right away, but when he did, his fingers were careful, gentle. Each button undone felt like a release, not just of cloth, but of pressure. Her shoulders relaxed as he moved. When he reached the last clasp, he didn't linger. He stepped back. "I'll let you rest," he said. Emily turned, clutching the dress to her chest, and met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, not hunger, not entitlement, but restraint, as if he was waiting to see if she'd bolt or breathe. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." And with that, she disappeared into the guest room, closing the door softly behind her. Inside, the room was warm, simple. A vase of fresh lilacs sat on the nightstand. Emily walked toward it slowly, trailing her fingers along the petals. How did he know? No one knew. That was her mother's flower, her mother's scent, her childhood memory. She sat on the edge of the bed, the satin dress pooling at her feet. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes, but they weren't from fear or regret. They were from something more dangerous, something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time: relief. For the first time, no one had asked anything of her body. No one had made a demand. No one had reached for her with expectation in their eyes. And in that quiet, Emily cried, not because she was trapped, but because someone, somewhere, had thought she deserved to be free. She didn't sleep much that night, not out of fear, but out of confusion. Who was this man she had married? And what did he want from her, if not what every other man had wanted before? The next morning she awoke to the smell of coffee, not overpowering, but soft, brewed with care. She stepped out of the room cautiously, barefoot, her hair loose over her shoulders. In the kitchen, Jack was flipping pancakes. He looked up when she entered, offering a small nod. "Good morning," Emily blinked. "You cook?" He chuckled, a quiet sound. "Sometimes. I figured you might not want to eat breakfast in a hotel lobby." She sat at the bar slowly, watching him work. His sleeves were rolled up, forearms dusted with flour. He moved with the precision of a man who'd made peace with silence, no talking just to fill the air. "I used to cook with my mom," he said after a pause, "before I went into the system." Emily tilted her head. "Foster care?" He nodded. "Until I aged out." She didn't ask more, but the weight of those words lingered in the room like steam. He slid a plate toward her, pancakes, golden and steaming, a touch of cinnamon, a mug of chamomile tea on the side. She smiled before she realized it. "You remembered." His eyes softened just slightly. "Lilacs, chamomile. You think I wasn't paying attention, but I was." Emily took a bite and something in her chest loosened. She hadn't eaten pancakes made for her since her parents died. The morning passed in quiet conversation. Nothing deep, books, music, the view. But it was real, not forced. And when Jack offered to show her the library, yes, he had one, she followed. The room was cozy, not grand. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, a reading nook by the window, one entire wall filled with biographies of unsung heroes. He picked up a book on women who'd changed history. "I thought you might like this," he said. "It reminded me of you." Emily took it in her hands, tracing the cover. He had married her with no demands. He had helped her out of the dress with nothing but gentleness. He had served her pancakes in silence, and now he gave her a book about strong women. Who was this man? And why did she feel deep in her gut that something was shifting? Not between them, but inside her. Because for the first time in a long time, Emily Carter didn't feel like someone surviving. She felt like someone beginning, and yet she didn't know what she was beginning toward. That evening, the city shimmered beneath a velvet sky, lights blinking like distant promises no one could reach. Emily stood by the massive window in the guest room, wrapped in a soft robe Jack had left folded at the foot of the bed. Her fingers toyed with the fabric absent-mindedly, her thoughts circling around a single truth. This wasn't what she had prepared herself for. She had braced for coldness, for distance, for control wrapped in kindness. But Jack had offered none of that. No veiled threats, no seduction, no manipulation, just space. And strangely, that unsettled her more than any demand could have. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Yes?" she called, her voice smaller than she meant it to be. Jack stepped in slowly, keeping his hands at his sides, his eyes respectfully lowered for a moment before meeting hers. "I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable," he said. "There's dinner in the oven if you're hungry later, and tea in the kitchen." Emily nodded. "Thank you." He didn't move, didn't shift his weight, just stood there quiet. Then softly, "If you need anything." "Actually," she hesitated, then exhaled. "Could you help me with my necklace? I couldn't get the clasp open earlier." He stepped forward slowly, his presence calm, his movements deliberate. She turned around, lifting her hair. He touched the clasp, and for the briefest moment, his fingers brushed the back of her neck. Not inappropriately, not even intentionally, but it was warm, real. The necklace slipped off, and she felt the whisper of metal slide down her skin. "There," he said, stepping back quickly. "All done." She turned to face him again, her voice softer now. I expected something different." Jack tilted his head. "Like what?" "I don't know. I guess I thought..." She struggled to finish the sentence. "That you'd want something from me." He didn't flinch, didn't look offended. Instead, he said, "I want you to feel safe, that's all." A pause. Then he added, "This marriage was never about owning you. I've seen what that kind of power does to people. I've been on the wrong side of it." Emily looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in front of her. "But why marry me?" she asked, not with accusation, but with honest confusion. "Why me, of all people?" He let out a breath. "Because you're not asking for anything. because you carry so much and still move like you're trying not to disturb the world. I thought maybe you deserved someone to stop and see you." She didn't know what to say. He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'll go now. Good night, Emily." But just before he turned, she reached out, almost without thinking, and touched his sleeve. "Wait." He froze. She searched his face. "Could you stay just until I fall asleep?" Jack's eyes softened. "Only if that's what you want." She nodded. "You can sit in the chair." And that's exactly what he did. He walked to the armchair by the window and settled in, silent and still. Not watching her, not hovering. Just there. Emily slipped under the covers, the sheets warm from the heater humming softly in the walls. She turned slightly to face him. "Did you ever want a family?" she asked into the quiet. Jack took a moment before answering. "Once. A long time ago. But I stopped believing I'd find it." "Why?" He smiled sadly. "Because every time I got close to love, it came with conditions. Expectations I could never meet." Emily blinked slowly, her body relaxing into the mattress. "I know what that feels like." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't hollow, it was shared, felt. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the moment settle into her chest. Minutes passed. She didn't speak again. But when her breathing slowed, deepened, Jack stood. He walked to the edge of the bed and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're safe now," he whispered, barely audible. Then, without another word, he left the room, closing the door with such quiet care it didn't even click shut. Emily didn't see him go, but she felt it, felt his absence as something that didn't wound, but protected. And for the first time in years, she fell asleep with her heart unclenched. No fear, no shame. Only one lingering question that hummed in her chest like a secret waiting to be spoken. What kind of man loves like this, and asks for nothing in return? The days after the wedding slipped by in quiet rhythm, like snowflakes melting on warm skin, soft, slow, almost unnoticeable. Emily found herself waking each morning in a bed that no longer felt foreign, to a silence that no longer felt empty. Jack kept his promise. He never crossed a line, never stepped into her space unless invited. Instead, he lingered in the background like a steady flame, always near, never overwhelming. It started with breakfasts. Some mornings, he made pancakes. Others, omelettes. One day she woke to the smell of cinnamon and found a plate of French toast waiting by the kitchen window, beside a folded napkin and a fresh cup of chamomile tea. He never sat with her unless she asked, but one morning she did. "Would you like to join me?" she said, barely above a whisper, her fingers wrapped around the mug. Jack glanced up from the paper, surprised. "If you don't mind." And so it began. Conversations at the table, about books, music, his favorite street in Paris, her dream of studying psychology, the moment her father taught her to ride a bike, the way Jack once sold lemonade at age 7 to buy a rusted guitar no one ever taught him to play. It wasn't instant closeness. It was gradual, gentle, like sun-warming frozen soil. Jack had a way of listening that made silence feel sacred. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush to respond. He let her speak or not speak, and never seemed to need more than what she offered. And Emily, for the first time in her life, felt heard. One evening they found themselves in the library. The snow tapped softly at the windows, and the fire cast dancing gold across the floor. Emily sat curled on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, a novel open in her lap. Jack entered, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I don't know how you always know exactly when I need this," she teased gently. He smiled, handing it to her. Just good timing. She watched him settle into the chair across from her, a rare ease in his shoulders. "Did you always like books?" Jack nodded. Books were safer than people. Emily tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He stared into the fire for a moment. "When I was a kid, I lived in 10 foster homes by the time I turned 12. Every time I got close to someone, I was moved again. But books stayed. I could open them and disappear into a world where no one sent you away." Emily swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her mug. I'm sorry." He met her gaze. "Don't be. It taught me how to notice quiet things." She blinked. "Like what?" Like how you breathe deeper when you talk about your parents. So how you always glance at the door before you laugh, like you're afraid someone might shut it on you. Her breath caught. It wasn't intrusive. It was intimate. A kind of seeing that felt like being known. They sat in silence after that, sipping tea, the snow falling heavier outside. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime rang softly on the balcony. Another night, Emily wandered into the kitchen and found him cooking. He was barefoot in a dark t-shirt and pajama pants, humming something barely audible under his breath. "Is that Sinatra?" she asked, amused. He turned, sheepish. "Caught." She leaned against the counter. "What are you making?" "Something simple. You want to help?" She nodded. They moved side by side, chopping, stirring, laughing when the sauce boiled over. Her fingers brushed his once as they reached for the same spoon, and this time neither of them pulled away too quickly. That night, they ate at the kitchen island, bare feet touching under the stools. The food wasn't perfect, but the moment was, and it kept happening. Little things, a shared laugh, a story exchanged, a glance that lingered just a moment too long. Once, she caught him watching her as she read, his face soft, unreadable. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "You just look peaceful when you read." Emily smiled faintly. "That's because I am." Another evening he asked, "What would you be doing right now if you weren't here?" She thought for a moment. Probably still working at the diner, saving for community college, trying to get out. "And now?" She looked at him. "Now, I'm still figuring that out." And he didn't rush her to decide. He simply nodded. "I hope you take your time." Slowly, something inside her shifted. Jack stopped feeling like a stranger, and Emily stopped feeling like someone who had been bought. She was beginning to feel chosen. One night as the snowstorm raged outside, the power flickered and went out. The whole penthouse dimmed into candlelight. Emily lit a few from the cabinet and found Jack sitting on the floor beside the fire, legs stretched out, a glass of wine in his hand. She joined him. Wrapped in a blanket, shoulder to shoulder, they talked for hours. About childhood dreams, about things they feared, about the quiet ache of wanting to be someone's safe place and not knowing how. "I think I stopped believing in love a long time ago," Emily said softly. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Me too." And yet there they were, sitting in the dark, sharing light neither one of them had expected to find. And somewhere between the silence and the snow, between the tea and the stories, between the glances and the unspoken warmth, something unnameable began to bloom. Something gentle, something dangerous, because maybe, just maybe, this wasn't survival anymore. Maybe it was the start of something neither of them dared to call love. Not yet, but it was coming, and they both felt it. The snow hadn't stopped in 2 days. Chicago lay beneath a white hush, and everything seemed slower, softer, quieter. Inside the penthouse, the world felt even more distant, like they were sealed inside something suspended between time and breath. Emily stood at the window, watching snowflakes swirl through the air like feathers lost in a storm. Her fingers held a steaming cup, the scent of chamomile curling into the space around her like memory. Behind her, Jack was setting the table, 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, and a candle already flickering. He'd done this every night that week, never once asking, never once expecting, but always inviting. Tonight was different, not because of what he did, but because of how she felt. Something inside her had shifted, not like a door opening, but like light slowly filling a room that had lived too long in dusk. After dinner, they sat on the floor near the fire again. Emily's laughter rang out as Jack recounted the time he accidentally wore mismatched shoes to a board meeting and didn't notice until the CEO of a rival company pointed it out with a smirk. "I wore those damn shoes for 3 hours," he said, chuckling. "And I didn't care until I saw the photos later." She shook her head, smiling. "You always look so put together. It's hard to imagine you off balance." Jack looked at her then, his expression softening. "That's because you haven't seen me with you." The fire crackled. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with meaning. Emily looked down at her hands, then back up. Her voice came quiet. "Do you know how many people have wanted something from me?" He didn't answer. "They've wanted silence, or service, or obedience, or my body." Her voice didn't tremble. "But you've never asked for any of that." He didn't interrupt. She leaned closer, just slightly, her eyes searching his face. "You've never tried to take anything, but somehow you've given me everything I didn't know I needed." He inhaled slowly, as if bracing for something he didn't dare hope for. Emily reached for his hand, not trembling, not hesitant. "Sure. I trust you, Jack," she said. He blinked, visibly moved. "You don't have to say anything," she added quickly. I'm not expecting a declaration. I just wanted you to know." He nodded, his voice low. "Emily, I've been waiting for you to feel safe. That's all I've wanted." Her thumb brushed over his knuckles. "I do." The moment stretched between them, warm, fragile, electric. Emily leaned in first, not out of duty, not out of pressure, but because something inside her knew. This was the moment when her past stopped defining her. Their lips met, softly, reverently. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't conquest, it was connection, the kind that didn't just touch skin but rewrote something deeper. He paused, pulling back ever so slightly, eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" he whispered. She smiled, tears stinging the edges of her vision. "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her again, slower this time. And when he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his room, no longer guest but shared space, it wasn't ceremony. It was surrender, not of power, but of fear. The room was dim, the sheets cool against her skin, the only sound their shared breath. He undressed her as if memorizing a sacred text, never rushing, never assuming. And when she trembled, it wasn't from fear, but from the enormity of being wanted, not for what she could offer, but for who she was. He kissed the scar beneath her collarbone that she never told anyone about. He held her, as if his arms had always been meant to carry that weight. Their bodies moved together, not like strangers, but like two people rediscovering what tenderness felt like after too long without it. And when it was over, and their heartbeats slowed in sync, Jack didn't speak. He only held her closer, pressing his forehead to hers. Emily whispered into the quiet, "I was afraid I wouldn't feel anything. And now?" She paused, her voice a breath. "Now I feel everything." Jack exhaled as if those words healed something in him too. They lay there in the dark, limbs tangled, silence settling like snow over rooftops. Outside, the storm softened. Inside, something far more dangerous began to bloom, something permanent. But Emily didn't try to name it. Not yet. She only held on tighter, knowing deep in her chest. This was no longer survival. This was choosing. And for the first time in her life, she was choosing love. The morning after was different, but not in the way Emily had feared. There was no awkwardness, no shift in tone, no ownership in Jack's eyes, just a quiet tenderness that lingered like sunlight, warming bare skin after a long winter. When she woke, his side of the bed was empty, but a soft note rested on the pillow. "Breakfast is waiting." "No rush?" "Jay." She smiled, pulling the sheet around her as she sat up. Her body ached in ways that reminded her she had surrendered, completely. But her spirit felt stronger than it ever had. She wasn't broken. She wasn't used. She was loved. And more importantly, she had chosen to be. Downstairs, the table was already set. Warm toast, eggs, and strawberries cut into heart shapes that made her laugh. Beside her plate sat a small leather-bound book, The Art of Letting Go. Inside, a bookmark rested on the first chapter. Love built on fear is not love at all. She turned the page slowly, her fingers brushing the soft paper. "Morning," Jack's voice came from behind her, gentle and low. She turned. He was barefoot, hair slightly tousled, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Chamomile," he said, "and coffee, just in case." She took the tea, her fingers grazing his, and for a long moment, they just stood there, close, grounded in something real. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. She nodded. "Better than I have in years." They ate slowly, without rush, without pretense. And when the dishes were cleared, Jack gestured toward the elevator. "I want to show you something." She followed, curiosity piqued. He led her to the rooftop. The sky above was pale blue, streaked with early sunlight. Snow blanketed the garden in quiet beauty, untouched except for the path he had already cleared. There was a small bench beneath an awning, a blanket folded over it. He offered it to her and sat beside her, their breath visible in the cold. "This was the first thing I built when I bought the place," he said, looking out over the skyline. "Not the view, not the wine cellar. This." Emily glanced around, puzzled. "Why?" "Because I wanted a place where I could sit and remember I was still human." She smiled faintly. "You never seemed like someone who forgot." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I did. For a while. Until you." She looked at him, heart tugging. "I don't want to be someone you need to rescue," she said. He met her eyes, serious now. "And I don't want to be someone who cages you." There was silence. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "What's this?" "A proposal," he said. "But not the kind you're thinking." Inside were documents, college applications, psychology programs, grant options, blank forms, waiting for her name. "I looked into some schools," he said quietly, "in case you still want to study." Emily stared at the papers. You did this for me?" He nodded. "Not because you owe me anything, but because you deserve to build your own future, on your terms." Her eyes filled. "No one's ever asked me what I wanted." "Well," he said, voice low. "What do you want, Emily?" She couldn't answer. Not yet. The question was too big, too beautiful. But her silence wasn't hesitation. It was awe. In the weeks that followed, their bond only deepened. They danced barefoot in the living room when no music played. They argued over books, laughed over burnt dinners, and shared quiet Sunday mornings in pajamas, reading on opposite ends of the same couch, her legs across his lap, his hand resting on her ankle without needing more. Jack never tried to change her, and Emily never tried to shrink herself to fit his life. They moved together, not as master and wife, not as debt and repayment, but as equals, as partners. One evening, Emily stood by the piano while Jack played a slow, uncertain melody. He didn't know she was watching until she laughed gently. "You said you never learned," he grinned. "Lied." "Why?" "I wanted to see if you'd stay long enough to find out." She crossed the room and leaned on the piano. "I'm not going anywhere." He stopped playing. Their eyes met, and neither one of them blinked. Later that night, as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing idle circles on her shoulder, Emily whispered into the quiet, "I thought I was marrying a man who wanted to own me." Jack's hand stilled. "But I fell in love with a man who let me be free." He kissed the top of her head. "I never wanted a wife," he murmured. "I wanted a witness, someone who could see me and stay." She pressed closer. "Then I guess we both got what we didn't know we needed." Outside, snowflakes fell again, gently brushing the window like blessings. And inside, in the stillness of breath and truth and slow becoming, love took root, not as a fairy tale, but as something real, something chosen. And yet, even then, neither of them could have imagined what the next chapter would bring. The first signs came quietly, easily mistaken for the toll of winter. Emily felt more tired than usual. Her appetite, usually steady and balanced, became unpredictable. Certain smells, cinnamon, eggs, even Jack's cologne, turned her stomach without warning. At first, she said nothing. She thought it might be the stress of adjusting to a new life or the lingering tension of years lived in survival mode. She told herself it would pass. But it didn't. One afternoon, while Jack was away in a meeting, Emily found herself curled on the couch under 2 blankets, her skin clammy and breath shallow. Linda, now more of a friend than a stylist, had stopped by to deliver fabric samples for a charity event. She took one look at Emily's pale face and narrowed her eyes. "When was your last cycle?" she asked softly. Emily blinked. I don't remember." Linda didn't push. She simply placed a small pharmacy bag on the counter before leaving, her hand brushing Emily's arm with knowing warmth. Inside, 2 pregnancy tests. Emily stared at them for an hour before finally walking to the bathroom, hands trembling. She sat on the edge of the tub, holding her breath as the minutes ticked by. One line, then a second, and a third test, and a fourth. All positive. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, not even from joy, from the sheer impossible fact of it. She was pregnant, with Jack's child, and suddenly, everything shifted. She didn't tell him immediately, not out of doubt, but because she needed a moment to breathe, a moment to feel the weight of it alone. That night, she cooked dinner, something simple, warm, familiar. Jack noticed her silence, but didn't press. He only watched her, gentle as always. After the plates were cleared and the lights dimmed, she took his hand and led him to the rooftop garden, now blanketed in snow. The sky above was crisp, filled with stars. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. Jack turned to face her fully. "What is it?" She placed his hand over her stomach. At first he looked confused. Then his breath hitched, his eyes widened, flicking from her face to his hand, to her eyes again. "You're—" he whispered. Emily nodded, barely holding back tears. "Yes." For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, as if the world had narrowed to that single truth. Then, something broke in him. He exhaled shakily, pulled her into his arms, and held her with a force that was equal parts disbelief and wonder. "I never thought—" his voice cracked. "I never thought I'd be someone's father." "You already are," she whispered against his chest. "Starting now." He stepped back, looking at her with eyes glistening. "Emily, are you happy?" She laughed softly through her tears. "I don't even know what to feel, but I'm not afraid." Jack cupped her face. "Whatever this child needs, whatever you need, I'll give it. I'll protect you both, I'll love you both." They stood in silence, letting the snow fall around them. Later that night, Jack brought out an old notebook, its leather worn, pages filled with scribbles. He handed it to her. "What's this?" "My list," he said. "Everything I promised myself I'd do if I ever had a child." Emily flipped through the pages. "Read bedtime stories. Never miss a birthday. Teach them to cook. Tell them the truth even when it's hard. Show them what love looks like by how I treat their mother." She couldn't hold back the tears. "I don't know how to be a mother," she confessed. Jack took her hand. "Neither do I. But we'll learn together." In the days that followed, something opened between them. They visited bookstores, flipping through baby name guides, arguing playfully about nursery colors. Jack insisted on soft greens and creams. Emily wanted pale lilac, of course. He touched her more now, not out of desire but devotion. A hand on her back when she stood too quickly, fingers brushing her hair back as she fell asleep. Kisses on her stomach, spoken dreams whispered into her skin. Sometimes she caught him talking to the baby when he thought she was asleep. "Hi there," he'd say, fingers splayed protectively. "I'm your dad. I've never done this before, but I promise I'm going to give you everything I never had." They began to dream aloud, of school runs, birthday cakes, laughing in the kitchen, late-night talks when the baby was old enough to ask big questions. And one night, as they sat on the couch, her head in his lap, Emily whispered, "Do you think we were meant to be a family?" Jack didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I think we were meant to be healing, and from that came family." Emily smiled through the tears, not of sadness, but of awe, because she wasn't just becoming a mother, she was becoming herself. And what none of them knew yet, what no test could show and no plan could predict, was that this child would not only transform their lives, but reveal secrets from the past that neither Emily nor Jack were ready to face. The air had begun to shift. Winter was slowly giving way to the promise of spring, though the snow still clung to the corners of the city like memories that refused to melt. Emily was in the study one afternoon, organizing old boxes Jack had offered to donate to a local shelter. It was a quiet day. Jack was away at a business meeting, and she found peace in the stillness. As she reached for a dusty carton labeled Carter Family, something inside her paused, her last name, her past. She hadn't spoken to her aunt and uncle in months, not out of revenge, just silence. She had forgiven Henry long ago, at least in pieces, But she hadn't known how to revisit that version of herself, the version that wore pain like a second skin. The box wasn't from them. It was from a storage unit in Brookfield, now closed. Jack had quietly paid off the debts and transferred everything into their care without telling her. Inside were faded photo albums, a few trinkets, and a worn envelope sealed in wax. Her mother's handwriting stopped her heart. To Emily for when she is ready. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. There were several folded letters inside, neatly tied with blue ribbon. The first bore her father's name. My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means life took a turn we never wanted. But perhaps in some strange way you've found your way back to us. We tried to protect you, sweetheart. You were never meant to carry the weight you did. Your Uncle Henry. We loved him, but he got lost. He was being threatened by people bigger than we could handle. The money, the lies. We tried to clean it up before it reached you. The accident that took us. It wasn't just a crash. We were going to confront someone that night. We wanted to save your future. Please don't hate him. He was a good man once, and sometimes good people break under pressure. All we ever wanted was for you to be free, to be loved the way you deserved. If you ever find someone who gives you that, don't run. Let yourself be loved. We'll always be with you, love, Dad. The second letter was shorter, from her mother. My little bird, you were always brave, even when the world wasn't kind. I know you're probably scared, and I know this letter can't undo the hurt, but I want you to know something. You were born from love, not chaos, not debt, not desperation, and I believe, deep in my bones, that you'll find someone who sees you, someone who will stand in the fire for you. Let that kind of love in. Let it change you. You were never meant to survive. You were meant to bloom. Always, Mum. Emily didn't realize she was crying until the words blurred on the page. She clutched the letters to her chest, knees pulled to her chest, rocking slowly as wave after wave of release poured through her. All this time, she had carried guilt for things she never caused, wounds that weren't hers to bear, silences she had mistaken for punishment. Jack found her there an hour later, the sun dipping low outside the window. He knelt beside her wordless and gently pried the letters from her hands to read them silently. When he finished, he looked at her with a depth of tenderness she had never seen. I wish they could see you now, he whispered. She laughed through the tears. Maybe they do. He held her as she wept, not just for the loss, but for the release. And the next day, without announcement or fanfare, Emily asked to visit her aunt's home. Vivian opened the door slowly, thinner now, older than Emily remembered. The house smelled the same, lavender soap and coffee, but the energy had shifted. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, Vivian said. I didn't come to reopen wounds, Emily replied gently, just to close a few. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Emily had once counted tips, where her dreams had sat folded beneath bills and silence. Vivian poured tea, her hands trembling. He died 2 weeks ago, she said quietly. Emily blinked. Henry? Vivian nodded. His heart. He didn't tell me how bad it was, just went to sleep and never woke up. Emily exhaled slowly. She felt no rage, only sadness, a kind of grief that didn't demand attention but simply settled. I found letters, she said after a while, from my parents. Vivian wiped her eyes. He kept those, always said they belonged to you. Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over the older woman's. I forgive you, she said softly, both of you. Vivian broke. The sobs that followed weren't loud. They were tired, emptying. Centuries of shame and regret released in the space of one touch. They talked until the sky turned dark. When Emily returned home, Jack met her at the door and pulled her into his arms. How do you feel? He asked. Light, she said, like I finally made space. For the new. He placed a hand over her growing belly. Then we're ready. Emily leaned into his chest, closing her eyes. She had walked through fire, but now, finally, she was ready for life. And just beneath her ribs, something fluttered. A first kick, a new beginning, a promise of what was yet to come. The snow returned the day Emily went into labor. Not the soft, dreamy flakes of early winter, but a thick white curtain that blanketed the streets and silenced the city. Jack had been on the phone with a board member when he heard her call his name from upstairs. Sharp, breathless, urgent. He was running before he realized it. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, hands on the small of her back, eyes wide. "It's time," she whispered, pain tightening her features. Jack didn't panic. He'd prepared. The bag was ready. The route to the hospital mapped out. Even a backup driver on standby in case the storm worsened. But nothing could have prepared him for the sound of her breathing in the car. Sharp, rhythmic, desperate. Or the way her fingers dug into his hand with every contraction. Or the moment she turned to him between waves of pain and said, "Don't let go." "I won't," he promised. And he didn't. The hospital room was warm and bright, but to Jack it felt like standing on the edge of something holy. Nurses moved around them with quiet urgency. Machines beeped. The world blurred into the steady rhythm of Emily's breath and the tightening of her grip. Time lost meaning. 3 hours. 6. 11. The pain etched itself into Emily's face, but she didn't break. She clenched her jaw, whispered through tears, cursed under her breath, and kept going. At one point she looked at Jack and said, "I can't do this." He leaned close, his forehead touching hers. "You are doing it, and I've never seen anything braver." And then, when the room shifted into a blur of movement and voices, when the nurses told her it was time to push, Emily closed her eyes and surrendered. Jack never looked away. Not when she screamed, not when the blood came, not when her body arched with a pain deeper than language. He held her hand the entire time, whispering, "You're almost there," again and again until it became a chant, a vow, a lifeline. And then a cry, small, sharp, brand new. Emily collapsed back into the bed, tears streaming down her face, her chest heaving, and Jack stood frozen. The doctor placed a tiny wriggling boy onto Emily's chest, and for a moment, time didn't just stop, it dissolved. Their son, pink cheeks, a dusting of dark hair, eyes tightly shut. Emily stared in wonder, barely able to speak. Jack knelt beside the bed, tears falling freely now, hands shaking. She looked at him. "Jack, meet Daniel." He reached out slowly, his fingers grazing the baby's back. Daniel stirred, tiny hands curled into fists, a soft whimper escaping his lips. And Jack broke, completely. He lowered his head to his son's, pressing his lips against the tiny crown, his shoulders trembling with silent sobs. "I never thought I'd be here," he whispered. "I never thought I'd be enough." Emily reached for his hand. "You are." He looked at her, eyes raw. "How can I thank you for this?" She smiled through tears. "Just love him. Every day. That's all he'll ever need." They stayed like that for hours. No calls, no visitors. Just the three of them wrapped in warmth, in tears, in the quiet miracle of becoming something new. Later, as snow fell beyond the hospital window, Jack stood at the glass with Daniel nestled in his arms. Emily watched from the bed, drowsy but alert. He rocked slowly, whispering things she couldn't hear. "What are you telling him?" she asked. Jack turned, his expression open, full of something new, something unshakable. "I'm telling him he was born from choice," he said. "Not obligation, not chance, but two people who chose each other and now choose him." Emily wiped her tears. "I'm telling him," Jack continued, looking down at the tiny face pressed to his chest, "that he will never wonder if he's loved. Not for a second." They brought Daniel home 2 days later, bundled in a cream-colored blanket, his face half hidden beneath a soft hat. The penthouse felt different, not larger, not quieter, just fuller. Emily stood in the nursery Jack had built himself, painted walls in soft sage, shelves filled with books and plush animals, a rocking chair beside the window. She placed Daniel gently into the crib, brushing her fingers over his tiny cheek. Jack stood behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "He's perfect," she whispered. "He has your courage," Jack said, "and your eyes." Emily turned to face him. "And he has your heart." Jack smiled, his eyes still misted. "Then he's already the luckiest boy alive." They stayed there until Daniel drifted off to sleep, the hush of the city below like a lullaby. And for the first time since she was a child, Emily felt it. Not safety, not comfort, but home. because home, she now knew, wasn't a place. It was people. It was Jack. It was Daniel. It was love. And as she turned off the light and let Jack lead her back to bed, she whispered to herself, "This is what they meant. This is what they were trying to protect me for." And somewhere, in the quiet spaces of memory, she could almost hear her mother's voice. "Let yourself be loved." The house in the outskirts of Chicago was nothing like the penthouse they once called home. It had a porch that creaked when you stepped on the second board, a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon and coffee, walls covered in framed drawings done with crayon and glitter glue. There was a swing set in the backyard, weathered, sun-warmed, scattered with toys and memories. And laughter. Endless, uncontainable, innocent laughter. Emily stood barefoot in the kitchen, holding a baby on one hip while flipping pancakes with the other. Her robe was half-tied, her hair in a bun that had surrendered hours ago, but there was peace in her eyes. Daniel, now 5, raced through the hallway with a toy cape flying behind him, shouting something about space pirates and invisible treasure. Jack appeared seconds later, wearing pajama pants and mismatched socks, chasing their son with a grin so wide it made Emily pause just to watch him. This was their life now, not perfect, but perfectly theirs. Jack still ran his company, but he no longer let it run him. He worked from home most days, never missing a school play, a pediatric appointment, or a chance to kiss his wife's shoulder while she stirred soup. Emily had gone back to school after Daniel was born. Slowly, carefully, one class at a time. Now she was a part-time counselor at a local youth center, working with girls who reminded her of who she used to be. Girls who needed someone to look them in the eye and say, "You matter. You're more than your circumstances." Some days were chaotic, some were exhausting, but all of them, every single one, were built on choice. Every morning, Jack chose to kiss her before checking his phone. Every evening, Emily chose to listen, to hold his hand even when they were too tired for words. And every night as their children slept, because yes, there was a second now, a wide-eyed little girl named Grace who had Jack wrapped around her tiny finger, they chose to say thank you even in silence. One autumn afternoon, Daniel climbed onto Jack's lap, his face serious. "Daddy," he said, "do people ever stop loving each other?" Jack paused, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. "Sometimes," he said gently, "when people forget to choose each other." Daniel tilted his head. "But you and Mommy never will, right?" Jack smiled. "Never." "Why?" "Because every day," Jack said, glancing at Emily across the room, "I wake up and choose her all over again." Emily turned at that exact moment, as if she had heard every word, and smiled. Not the kind of smile worn for show, but the kind that said, "I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly where I belong." Later that night, when the house was quiet and the children finally asleep, they stood on the porch beneath a sky scattered with stars. Jack wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "Do you remember the first night?" he whispered. She laughed softly. "Which part? The awkward silence, the lilacs, or you running out of the room like you were afraid I'd combust?" He chuckled. "All of it." She turned to face him. "We were strangers. Now we're everything," he said. Emily rested her head against his chest, listening to the heartbeat that had once felt so far away. They stood like that for a long time. No urgency, no fear, just love, quiet, real, resilient, not built in a single moment, but in thousands. Thousands of tiny, sacred moments. A forehead kiss instead of a claim. A pancake on a cold morning. A chair pulled closer during silence. A whispered, "I trust you." And maybe that was what love truly was. Not fireworks, but presence. Not perfection, but choice. Over and over and over again. They didn't fall in love all at once, they built it. Through silences, through choices, through days that asked for patience and nights that asked for presence. What began as an agreement became a devotion. Not loud, not perfect, but real. And perhaps in the end that's what love truly is, the quiet decision to stay. And because sometimes the greatest kind of love is simply the one that shows up. If this story moves something in you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. Where are you listening from today? Your voice is part of what makes this space so human.